Well, Katie, thanks for joining us today. Before we really go into this awesome opportunity to talk through branding and brand building and your experience there, just share a little bit about your background, where you've worked at, your previous history, and then kind of where you are today.
Sure. Colby, thanks for having me. Great to be here. And my background has always been in what I would say in marketing, although if you had asked me early on when I had communications positions, I might not have said that. But as I look back through the lens of review, it's definitely been within brand, what I like to call brand building. And so I worked for an international PR firm, worked in also in sales and telecommunications business early in my career, and did that internationally. So I lived in Costa Rica, Panama, and Mexico,
Hmm.
and then used that. I'm based in Miami, Florida, which is kind of a bilingual environment,
Yeah.
and also have worked in house with companies, helping companies build brands, and also external affairs as well, at a university. So, all of that really building brand and making connection is how I would describe that.
And before we dive into conversations, oftentimes I guess I like to just get a definition of what we're talking about because, with KPIs and all these different terms, what you think of as brand building could be different from the next person. So, how would you define brand or brand building?
Yeah, I love that question because so often companies use this marketing speak or brand speak. And so I think that it is really important to go through and speak to each company how they're measuring success.
Hmm.
And you're measuring success most often through sales or through, I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's why companies are in business, or with nonprofits. And I take on about 1 to 2 nonprofits each year because I have a fundraising background. You're looking in, are you fundraising and you're impacting your clients in the nonprofit space? And so, what oftentimes I like to look at with my clients and understand their revenue streams and understand where those revenues are coming from so that whatever kind of brand building activities we will be doing are tied to driving revenue and supporting the people who are driving revenue. So that might be in some case more traditional marketing. It might include social media or public relations, or it could do collaborations or et cetera. So it can take the form of a lot of different things. But really, at the end of the day, what's your business? What are your revenues? And how are you guys defining success? And then we're going to back in how we're going to build your brand.
No, I love that. And I think it's easy for direct response marketers or direct response marketing to see this is DR, this is brand, creative, messaging, etc., and to separate the two. In a previous conversation I had on the podcast with someone leading a very prominent t-shirt company brand or clothing company brand, t-shirt would belittle what they were doing because they're doing a lot, but really focused on him mentioning that they are together. And, brand building can really be um, not training your customers, but training your customers for how to see you and what to expect from you. And then it's your product's job to deliver that. And then ideally, you can also see that impact of your brand building and your messaging and alignment in reviews because people will likely be leaving positive or negative reviews based on their expectation and then the delivery and how they received what they were expecting that way as well.
Yes.
So very, very beneficial to think about. And, key components to brand building. I mean, there's a big term, like you said, for building brand. There's a lot of different aspects to it. But if someone is looking at 2025 and they want to really prioritize brand building for their company, for their nonprofit going forward, what are those key building blocks or components that you think are critical?
I would start with your clients and really understanding where your clients purchasing your product or your service or connecting with you. And then what you're going to do is build a very specific mix that's targeted to your client. And so one of the things, in fact, I did recently with a client is I said, listen, we can have lots of great ideas, but how does your client feel about
Mm.
doing a new social media campaign, or how do they feel about, and so you have the opportunity to touch base with your clients. And listen, social media right now, you can throw a poll in there today and get some immediate feedback. So sometimes we talk about surveying and it feels a little daunting, frankly, and it doesn't need to be. And so some of the success that I've had is with clients is using quick response to be able to connect with your clients, so that, back to your question, you're developing a marketing program that is in line with where they're buying, what they're buying, the messaging, the why they're buying, that your messaging is in line with that.
I agree 100%. And, I'm currently building a software company. So I have the agency, but through what we've done, I see a need for a software, and I have a team building that out right now. And that's one thing that we're doing. We have no customers. We're pre-product, pre-revenue, pre-everything. But I've been going into communities that I'm a part of that have the ICP, because technically I am the buyer persona. So finding other people that own agencies that are media buyers, et cetera, and asking to get on a 30-minute call with them and interviewing them certain questions based on their job title. Is that highly scalable? Not necessarily. Bigger companies could hire somebody to do that, but it's making sure from the beginning, A, that we're building in the right direction, but B, that our messaging and our overall focus is
That's
achieving what the
exactly
end
it.
customer needs.
Yes, I love that. That is so cool. Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. Because what you're doing is you've identified a gap in the market,
Hmm.
which is critical. But secondly, what you're doing is you're going to address what are the messaging points that resonate with your ideal client.
And it helps there. So for anybody listening, this helps with new customer acquisition, what messaging points resonate with the client. It also helps with retention. We are working with a beauty skincare brand right now, and we're trying to help them turn around their bottom line. They've had great top line growth, but their bottom line not fully there. And part of that is because of retention and product development. So I'm talking software, what we're building. But if you're a SKU company or a physical product company, the products you're developing should also be based on what your customers say they want and what they need as well. So that, we're talking about branding, but there's many aspects that come into this that can be beneficial
Yeah.
as well. Well, that customer interview is a critical piece. Any other critical components, or would you say that ICP interview or just understanding your customer is the main building block going
Start
forward?
there. That's really, if you think about it, that is your foundation.
Yeah.
And so when you begin with that, you're going to have, it becomes a guide to you in what you're doing. And it also, it takes out the opinion. And so if you have,
Mm-hmm.
for example, one person sees it in this way and someone else sees it another way, you take away, what does the client say? What do the client,
Mm-hmm.
and that is really critical. I'm working with a financial services company right now, and one of their market leaders sees some of their messaging in this way, and somebody in corporate sees it in a different way. And who's talking to the client? And so that is a great way to streamline discussions internally if you have differing opinions. So yeah.
Do you find this process also helps remove messaging from feature or product focus to more client focus?
Yes, yes, without question. And it gives you the chance too to change your marketing deliverables. Okay, wait a minute. Like, I have an education client right now. We had some great feedback from the field. We had 3 ads ready to go. They were like, "Oh, these are doing okay. They seem to be hitting the mark." And then we got some really great feedback. They weren't wrong. That's the thing. They weren't wrong, but could they have been better? And indeed
Mm.
they could have. And so we're just updating some of that messaging, and then that'll go in your ad buy. So that's actually an interesting example, because when I say ad buy, you can say, oh, that's big budget, that's large corporate. No, it's a hyper local newsletter and newspaper, and that's worked really well for this client. And it's hyper local because they're really focused on where their target clients are living, breathing, reading. And so I think that is critical.
Well, that's a great point. So you're saying that, branding, it can be very easy to get in the clouds with the term branding and think, the Nike big ads or the Super Bowl commercials or these types of things, newspaper. I mean, wherever your content is, wherever your messaging is, making sure that it's aligned with the customer and what you're trying to build.
Let's take this example and talk some real specifics, because I know that you like to give people
Yeah.
actionable ideas. And so this example, in fact, Colby, is a newsletter that has an online presence with 12,000 readers. They have a 37% open rate, which is very
Okay.
high. So, I mean,
Hmm.
that's really great. And it's decidedly targets predominantly women, and this is an educational client. And of course, moms are oftentimes the ones that are making the school decisions.
Hmm.
And so that is a really terrific outlet for them, and it's what we call hyper local. So
Hmm.
it's certainly not a Super Bowl ad.
Yeah. And, that's an interesting aspect as well that kind of goes into the next question. So you said it's hyper local. With hyperlocal targeting, if you're doing influencer sourcing, one thing we look at for e-commerce companies is how can we do influencer sourcing in a zip code or region so we can make sure with Google Analytics, with website traffic, all of those things, if we can notice sales lift in that market or in that region before we try to go nationwide. And also because it's beneficial if we can make sure multiple influencers in one small area hit people in a simultaneous pattern so there's frequency that way. But with the organic or with the hyperlocal piece, it can help with tracking. I know you said you measure performance really bottom line based off sales. Are we seeing a better sales lift? Is our blended CPA declining? Is there any other aspects you look at when it comes to branding and measuring impact from that?
I think it would be campaign specific.
Okay.
Um, so, I mean, like what I mentioned to you from that newsletter, I really love that they have, for example, they have the newsletter, but they also do events. And so then, oh, what I recommended to this client, and we have then proceeded with, is we sponsored one of those events. So you're having some repetition, not only in the open rate on the newsletter, which is really high and great. You're driving traffic to an event, or if you're new in a market, that company, that hyper local, is almost like a good housekeeping stamp of approval, old school example. But listen, I'm telling you, third party credibility really helps when you're trying to bond with new clients. And it's a strategy that's working. And this is a new client; they're in a new market, although they're an established brand in their original market. But if you're in Miami and somebody else is in New York, that takes a while to make sure that translates.
And you may have already said this, but when you say third-party accreditation, are you talking like PR, news stations, interviews, publications? Was
No,
that what?
so like some of these, just to take this hyper local example. So if we think about third party credibility, and this is a new offering in the market, a new client in the market, then they're partnering with somebody who's a known quantity, a known
Gotcha.
entity in that market. And so then they're doing some ads in the newsletter, and they're co-branding and sponsoring an event. So they're able to overlap with their target markets, and then the target market for this particular outlet, this media company. And again, I say media company, which is kind of a highfalutin term, but that's what they are.
Mhm.
And so I think that it's really, I encourage people to look at where your clients are, and it will help you. And economically, from an economic standpoint, you're connecting with your clients, but the ad buy isn't as large as if you were talking about large nationwide outlets.
And I love that continued focus on the hyper local with the sponsoring the event. There's another brand that I've talked to that was talking about how they've been able to build out brand. They're well known in the snowboarding skiing community. And the founder said that he looks at the United States map like an opportunity to plant seeds for growth. So they'll find a market and they'll sponsor a couple of events there. And once they start to establish foothold a little bit, they'll find another nearby market and start to plant seeds for growth there. So sponsoring events, knowing that they're in a close enough radius that eventually those people will start to overlap and communicate, and then continue to just out of radius or distance from the first place, continue to build it out that way, which was a very interesting thought or way to look at it.
That's a great example, and that's why when people say, "What do you do?" and I said, I build brands, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what you can talk marketing, you can talk communication, you can talk, but at the end of the day, like your client in that outdoor space, he's building his brand,
Mm-hmm.
one engagement at a time, and so that's a perfect example of what we're talking about. Very cool.
I love it. Well, as we close out, this conversation, any overlooked opportunities for brand building going into 2025 by the time this releases somewhat into 2025?
Yeah, yeah, sure. Well, one thing that I've heard you say before is don't play small. And that's some of your recommendation that I saw on the podcast. And just that notion of if you have a bold idea, test it.
Hmm.
Test it with your clients and use some of that and say, hey, what do you guys think about this? And get some of that feedback, put it out there. And to continue the theme that we're discussing is get some market intel. It doesn't have to be a particularly complex focus group or a Q score or it's something of those not that nature. It can be some quick and dirty market intel, and that will help you as you look forward to making those plans and making perhaps a bold change in your messaging. So I think that is the overlooked. It goes back to the customer. How can you connect with them, and how can you find out what their thoughts are on what you're sharing, the message you're sharing?
I love it. And yeah, we always say when in doubt, test it out. So if you have an idea, go for it, see how it goes, and then let the data tell you if it's a good idea or a bad idea. If you don't necessarily align with your customer insights, still test it out. Still see what performs.
Well,
Like,
Colby, what I love about that expression in "when in doubt, test it out" is that you're taking action,
mm-hmm.
and you're taking action on what you think is an idea instead of thinking about it in the conference room. And
Yeah,
so that is awesome. That's
yeah.
great advice. I might use that one. I'll attribute it to you.
Go for it. Yeah. Go for it. Well, Katie, great conversation today. If someone wants to learn more about you, or I'll say this for anybody that visits her website, she did not name drop the very big names that she has worked with, which is pretty cool, but she's worked with some very big names. If you follow sports at all, you'll immediately know it when you hit her website. Where can people learn more about you and potentially work with you?
Colby, thanks so much. I love to connect with folks, whether that's on LinkedIn, Katie Cabanas, or via Instagram, which is Cabanas Consulting, or certainly my website, which is cabanasconsulting.com. And would love to connect with your listeners in one of those ways.
Well, Katie, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me, Colby. I appreciate it.